So Margie, before the advent of the internet and social media and all that stuff that ruined everything, the only real way to get a good gauge of what the rest of America, or the world really, was thinking was to watch a talk show. I know they're not as important now, but to our generation, they were a big part of our lives. So going along with our wildly popular Top 3 series, I thought we could do a Top 3 talk show host of all time. What do you think?
I think let's do it. My number 3 is Donahue.
All right, Grandma. That's who my grandma liked, was Donahue.
Yeah, a lot of women did. And that is kind of why he's on my list. That's one of the reasons why he's on my list. Donahue was really the kind of the advent for the popularity of and the renaissance of the daytime talk show. He was so popular because he did focus a lot of his shows on women's issues.
Women are exploited in relationships.
And his producers recognized that women were a big part of the marketing potential for this show. It was kind of a realization like, oh, women like to listen to people talk back and forth. And they did in droves. And so his show was actually syndicated in 1970 and lasted until 1996. And it was a really cool show, honestly. This was a dude that was a weatherman at a local station, did some local TV news work, and decided that he wanted to do a show and kind of talk about politics, religion, social issues. And he had a great format because he would bring somebody on. They would talk for, a full 60 minutes would be his show length. He would focus on this one person or this one issue.
What did Mr. McMahon know, and when did he know it? And is it unfair to have asked him to give these guys the heave-ho, given the complexity of these charges? Who's got the evidence? Who's going to believe who?
Then the audience could get up and participate by asking questions. And Phil Donahue would act as the moderator between the audience and whatever subject or person he was interviewing. And it was really great because a lot of the times the audience would be asking questions that you yourself were thinking. And they did talk about a lot of things that were in public perceptions at the time. There was a few shows discussing obscenity, which was a big topic back in the 80s, and we will probably do a show on that in the future, where 2 Live Crew was interviewed and was talking back and forth with the audience about obscenity
I
laws.
actually remember that one, I think.
He's the thinking man's Geraldo Rivera. What can I say?
Yeah.
Oprah has famously said, a lot of people have famously said, without Donahue, I wouldn't be here.
You are wonderful. I said it when we were off there, and I want to say you are loving and generous, and you like women, and it's a pleasure. And whoever is the woman in your life is very lucky.
My number 3 is not going to come as a surprise to anyone. It's my favorite comedian of all time, Norm Macdonald. What? You might be thinking, Norm never had a talk show. Yes, he did, and it was right here on YouTube. 2 seasons of Norm Macdonald Live here on YouTube was the funniest thing I've ever seen in my life. It was the best talk show ever. He would have just whoever he found interesting on there, and they would just riff. I suggest, if you can find it, looking up the 2-parter with Gilbert Godfrey, watching the very first episode with Super Dave Osborne, Bob Epstein, and they would just riff and go on about stuff, and it was hilarious. If you can find the episode where he makes Stephen Merchant uncomfortable for 45 minutes, that one is a classic. Again, they're hard to find because the 3rd season was on Netflix, and I guess they've got the rights for it. And that's still pretty good. It's interesting. He's got good interviews on there with Billy Joe Shaver and Jane Fonda, and it's still funny. But those 2 seasons on YouTube were something else, man. I know I'm biased because it's Norm Macdonald, but I've probably never laughed as hard at anything as I have those seasons of Norm Macdonald Live. And Norm just did, like always, he did what he thought was funny, and it got him in trouble. He lost his sponsors, most famously the Man Great.
The Man Great.
Have you ever seen the compilation of him and the Man Great?
No, I have not.
They're revolutionizing the way people grill. What, Adam Egan? It's true. You haven't heard of the revolution?
You know what's so hilarious about that is that he's really not saying anything bad about the man great. It's just the way he's delivering it that's so hilarious. It's just poking fun at the whole idea of an ad in general.
So I love on Normie.
Yeah. Dan, are you ready for my number 2?
Yeah.
It's Space Ghost. This show has 100% on Rotten Tomatoes. Granted, there's only about 6 to 16 reviewers that reviewed it on Rotten Tomatoes.
That's still well deserved.
It is very well deserved. This was the wellspring for a lot of the quirky, weird, subversive, wild shows to kind of come afterwards, including shows like Robot Chicken, Family Guy, and the whole Adult Swim program.
All kids out of the pool for Adult Swim.
When I think of Gen X humor and kind of the best example of it, it's Space Ghost, Coast to Coast, and that early Adult Swim stuff. I remember me and you used to stay up and watch this, and then Sue Johansson would come on after for some reason, and boy, that'd be a Saturday night.
Right. You'd have this crazy cartoon, and then you'd have Sue Johansson telling you all about your sex life. It was great.
Gen Xers love nostalgia, and this was the first show to really play on that hard. Like, we all grew up watching Space Ghost on Saturday mornings, and now here he is later, a drunk talk show host.
Right. He was drunk half the time. It was very surreal. It was half animation, half live footage.
I've been interviewed by all of them. Regis, Kathy Lee, Regis and Kathy Lee.
Like Donahue tapped into that market for women viewers, Space Ghost tapped into the market for weird.
I agree.
They figured out that weird, different, kind of crazy new things were what these young people liked. And Space Ghost got a cult following, and it put the Cartoon Network on the map because it was one of its flagship programs.
Yeah. I commend you for thinking outside the box. If I would have thought of Space Ghost, he might have been in my top 3. Every time I tell anyone how much I love my number 2 pick, at first they think I'm being ironic, but I'm not. I first watched him with my mother, I think, some morning probably when I took off school, and I just thought he was hilarious. It's Regis Philbin.
You ready for this? Are you ready for this?
Live with Regis and Kathy Lee, or Ripa, or whoever you want to pair him with, he'll carry him. It doesn't matter because he's Reg. He just always seemed to be the most approachable. He would, in the mornings, you'd have your coffee, you'd be hungover or gripey or whatever, and he would just tell you about his night out with Joy and somehow make it hilarious. Just that old cantankerous man bit, it tickles my funny bone.
I agree. I think he was very genuine. He just seemed a very genuine guy. One of the few, I guess, people that at least, and I could be completely wrong. I don't know Regis. I don't know Regis personally, but he just seemed like somebody that you would really genuinely want to have at your dinner party.
Yeah. Like Carson was kind of cool. So was Letterman. They did not let you into their personal lives. But Reg did. And other talk show hosts loved him. Like David Letterman loved him and would have him on a lot. And that was always a highlight.
You've been here over 150 times, more than any other single guest.
Exactly.
I do have to say that his partnership, and you're right, he could have absolutely carried anyone that sat next to him. A rock, Pet Rock, Regis Philbin would have a successful talk show called Me and the Rock with Reg and the Rock.
Live with Regis and a Rock.
But it did have a special sort of chemistry and hilarity with Kathy Lee.
He was best with Kathy Lee.
Her Kathy Lee-ness totally complemented his Regisness. The Regosity complemented the Cathicity of the. It was just a winning formula. So great pick. Yeah.
It was like watching the class clown and then the goody two shoes at school do a talk show together.
Yeah, kind of. Would you like to hear about my number 1 pick?
Drum roll, please.
My number 1 is David Letterman. David Letterman! He was, again, kind of like Space Coast. He was a little bit subversive. This guy was grassroots, like Donahue. He was, I believe, a local weatherman and then a local news anchor. I don't even think he got that far, actually. I
And
think
he stand-up. He started out in stand-up, too.
Yeah, but I mean, as far as like broadcasting, I think
yeah.
as far as he went was weather and I think occasional news. But he basically built a cult following at the latest of TV slots, back when TV would shut off, by the way.
Yeah.
It would shut off for a period of time between 3 a.m. and, 5 a.m.
You'd get the national anthem and then static.
So he built a cult following at the very latest of times with the goofiest of concepts, including things like stupid human tricks. He kind of had that curmudgeonly act going on. Cher famously called him an asshole on the air.
I thought that I would never want to do this show with you.
Now why? Because you thought I was
An ass.
But yeah, there was something fascinating about just this guy who he had fun, he seemed genuine, he was curmudgeonly, and yet you believed him as a talk show host because he was genuinely curious about his guests.
My grandma liked Carson. My mom liked Letterman. And my number one is the Gen X version of those guys.
Conan O'Brien!
I love Conan. I was there for the very first episode. I watched it the night it debuted. I knew he was kind of a Gen X guy. And I watched it, and it cracked me up. I thought it was unlike any talk show I'd ever seen, kind of deconstructing the genre. I was pretty much alone in liking it. It got panned critically. People said he was too nervous. One critic said he was too smart, too East Coast, too sophisticated, too young, and even too tall to be successful. But those people who got it. And it was mostly young people. It was mostly Gen X people like me. When we first got married, we'd stay up late and watch at least the opening monologue and sketches because they were hilarious, man.
And Andy Richter also made them hilarious. The duo that they made was great.
Andy is definitely the GOAT sidekick.
Yeah.
Sorry, Ed McMahon lovers, but Andy is the GOAT. He was just as funny as Conan, and those two would play off each other really great, yeah. And those early years, his riders were Louis C.K., Robert Schmeigel, Bob Odenkirk, who you all probably know from Better Call Saul, but was a comedy guy back in the day. Yeah. I like that all these years he stuck to his comedy vision. I mean, he remained goofy and doing his funny things. Like him going out on location is always the best. I highly suggest the one where he becomes a mall Santa or the one where he becomes a Civil War reenactor.
Two things I think really define him as, two things that jump out in my head that really define him as a Gen X talk show host. Yeah. And number one was, you talked about how nervous he was, not how nervous he was, but how he was under such pressure to be this talk show host, to bring in the young crowd, right?
Oh, and Conan, one more thing. You better be as good as Letterman, or else.
Nobody thought he could do it, and the thing that defined his Gen Xeriness was that he actually parodied his own failure. He made fun of that. He made fun of the fact that people thought he was going to fail. So there's that self-depreciating Gen Xer humor.
I believe that for Variety, I'll have to look it up, but for some newspaper, the day that the Conan O'Brien show debuted, because there was a lot of talk about him being an unknown, because no one knew who he was at the time. He had written for some stuff. He penned a article called Conan O'Brien Flops. I like that he stuck with that vision. Like, after the success of Jon Stewart, every other talk show became political, but not him, which I think is very good. Yeah. And I was upset when he got cheated out of the Tonight Show, but in retrospect, that was not us. That's not Gen X. That was my grandma's show. Yeah. Conan just doing his own thing off by himself. That's the Gen X way. Maybe a smaller audience, but that's fine.
Yeah. Hit like and subscribe,
Don't forget, yeah.